ठीक है, ओके करिए, वहां से ओके करिए। अरे हाँ, ऐसे ऐसे हो गए तो काटिए आप, वहां से ओके करिए, जाके देखिए, वहां जाके ओके करिए ना। A very nice good afternoon to all of you, my dear students, viewers. In today's lecture, I am going to take up uh, Edwardian period and Georgian period. See, this period is in the history of English literature that took place after math of 90s, what we call decadence or what we call aesthetic movement. See, these were three movements: 1990s, decadence and aesthetic. And after that we have Edwardian and Georgian period. And then we come what we call modernism. You see, modernism के बीच की जो दो पीरियड था, I am going to take up that. And in my previous video, I told you some of the writers. I mentioned the name of the writers who in fact introduced this modernist tendency after Victorian realism. They produced a certain type of anti-Victorian reality. That Victorian, that Victorian morality, what we call. So against this Victorian morality, we have the writers like Oscar Wilde, Gustav Flaubert. Then we have Walter Pater, and these writers, they completely reverse the Victorian morality, and in a way they produced a new type of realism which is called aesthetic or decadence or what we call this 1990s, means that they had certain agenda, that the purpose of art is not to explore life, rather art is for art's sake, right? How can we say that it is not necessary for an artist or any book to render some message, right? Objectivity should be maintained, and this is the main issue of 1990s aesthetic and decadence. And especially you must read the very interesting essay by Walter Pater. It is called the Renaissance, Introduction to Renaissance, and where he takes most of the Renaissance painting, like Michelangelo's some of the painting, Last Supper, and then we have Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, and basically he deals with the theme of hedonism, right? Like if you read his novel like Picture of Dorian Gray. So this portrayal subject became very important, right? That also you find in Henry James' Portrait of a Lady, and then later we have James Joyce, who has written a book called, it is a very interesting novel called, apart from Ulysses was published in 1922. Araby, Ulysses, you have, but his famous novel is A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It is a very interesting novel. So, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, that is Kunslo Roman. And then we have as David Copperfield is a building Roman. So building Roman and Kunstler Roman. This is the transformation. So this art became very important. That is the subject of novel. But today I am going to take up poem. It's very interesting fact that as I told you that in 20th century we had a special form of writing that is called stream of consciousness technique. Stream of consciousness technique. बहुत इसमें क्वेश्चन आता है, मैं रिवाइज कर रहा हूँ. I want to revise that this is called stream of consciousness technique. Stream of consciousness technique. And you see there is so what Virginia Woolf says, this is very interesting. Virginia Woolf in her essay, it was published in 1924, Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Brown. Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Brown. In 1924, this essay was published. Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Brown. Virginia Woolf witnessed in 1910 post-impressionistic painting. Post-impressionistic painting. And then Virginia Woolf made a very interesting declaration that on or about December 1910, human character changed. This is very interesting point. He says, Virginia Woolf says that human characters change. Human characters change. Or you can say human nature changed. Virginia Woolf ने कहा कि after perceiving 1910 post-impressionistic painting displayed by exhibited by Roger Fry and some other painter, Roger Fry, she pointed out that human nature has changed completely. What does Virginia Woolf want to say? She says that the world of after post-impressionistic painting, this post-impressionism, impressionism is a topic, special topic that you should read. She said that the subject of the writing or literature is not the outer world, right? This is not the outer realism. What we call, this is not the subject about outer realism that you find in Victorian society, right? In Victorian society, you find outer realism. That is most of the fiction that we call wealth, property, establishment, right? Money, etc. Money, right? Or if I use Jane Austen's term, we call it pole of utility. Pole of utility. Then Virginia Woolf says that this pole of utility, or what we call establishment, wealth and property, that had collapsed, right? That had been completely collapsed. And this has been replaced by what we call inner psychology. Inner psychology. Inner psychology. Or what T.S. Eliot called depth analysis. What T.S. Eliot called depth analysis. In the word of T.S. Eliot, that modern world is an era of the depth analysis. And also you find this, at the same time, there is a book published by Henry James' brother, William James, the principle of psychology, where William James says that the modern reality is nothing but subjective human consciousness. So this subjective human consciousness also became very focal point. So the art or literature of Victorian era, which was a social taboo at that time, Victorian era. For example, in Victorian era, nobody can talk about the subject like sexuality. Nobody can talk the subject like sexuality, which was a taboo, ऑनलाइन क्लास चल रही है, ऑनलाइन आधे चाय भी सकते हैं, ओके बाय लेते हो पानी. So social taboo, right? I'm sorry, I'm having tea. I'm feeling rather cold. So he says that that modern reality is, this is what we call completely new reality. New reality means new realism. And this new realism is in the world of Virginia Woolf. She says that life is not a gig-line of symmetrical order. See, in life there is nothing what we call symmetrical order, right? Because there is what we call so many hurly-burly. Our mind is not in a stable state, right? And that is what we call insight. This world is called insight world. And that's how Virginia Woolf has also written another essay. She has written another essay, and the topic of the essay is modern fiction. Modern fiction. You must read all these modern fiction. It was published in 1919. In modern fiction, she says that life is not the life is not the dire realism that we had in Victorian society. Rather, is this life? No. She says that look within yourself. Look within yourself. If we think about ourselves, or if we look within ourselves, then it is not a linear outward progression. You see, that is what he says. He says that it is not a linear outward progression. It is not a linear outward progression. Then also what he says that from breakfast to lunch to dinner, that is not our life. There is no absolute, there is nothing, see, that life cannot be measured by what we call corporeal reality, materialistic reality, right? That is not only the meaning of life that we find in Victorian society, right? Rather, life is a luminous hollow. This is what he says, that life is a luminous hollow. That is another point. And then she says it is a consciousness comprising of incessant shower, incessant shower, randomly falling atoms, incessant shower, incessant shower. She also says that our life received myriad of expression. She also says that our life received myriad of expression. That is, also she says there is sensory impression within us. There is sensory imagination. So by mentioning all these words, Virginia Woolf wants to say. Virginia Woolf says that there is an illusion in life. There is an illusion in life. Life is in a state of illusion. Life is a very complex phenomena. Life is about inner life. The reality is unconscious. Life is not something that what we do in a physical or corporeal reality. That is, we get up early morning, we had breakfast, then we go to office, we had lunch, then we return, we had dinner. That is not only materialistic. Rather, it is an incessant, complex, myriad expression. Right? Which means that there is so many problem is inside. And the world is all about inside. And that's how you must keep in mind. At the same time, you know, Sigmund Freud has written a very interesting book. Sigmund Freud. It is called The Interpretation of Dream. This book is called Interpretation of Dream. This book was published in 1910. This is called Interpretation of Dream. This book you must read. Very interesting book. For the first time, we had the theory like psychoanalysis. This is very important. We have theory like psychoanalysis theory, right? It is not psychological. It is not psychological. It is called psychoanalysis theory, right? And this is very important that for the first time psychoanalysis theory. So as I told you that when we, and this is very interesting essay. देखिए जो मैं पढ़ा रहा हूं इसको जरूर सही से समझिएगा, बिकॉज एक बार आपका कॉन्सेप्ट क्लियर हो गया ना तो आप किसी भी एग्जाम को क्लियर कर लेंगे. और जैसा कि आप जानते हैं अब सारे एग्जाम में, जैसे पहले हमारे यहाँ पीसीएस और आईएएस का एग्जाम होता था, प्री मेंस इंटरव्यू, उसी तरह से हो गया है. मेंस में रिटन होता है, उसका प्रैक्टिस जरूर करिएगा. So if you see the background of the 20th century, you find that you have some thinkers like Nietzsche who say that there is no God, or Karl Marx, nothing, no God. He said that I have found eagle and I have put down eagle on the foot. What does he want to say? He says that the entire reality of 20th century is all about corporeal reality. That is called Marx. Then we have Sigmund Freud. And this Sigmund Freud is very important. Sigmund Freud has written a book called Interpretation of Dream in 1910. At the same time when post-impressionistic painting was exhibited. How coincidence, you know, that's 1900. I think this book is published in Interpretation of Dream, not 1910, but around 1900. 1900 probably. So this Edwardian period is very important period in terms of psychology also, in terms of psychology. In terms of psychology, right? And this is what we call illusion. So this is the background of Edwardian period. And that's how I told you that in Edwardian period, I mentioned you certain writers in my previous video, that you find Henry James. Later you have writers like Christopher, like Joseph Conrad, Edward Bennett, John Galsworthy, these writers. So Edwardian period basically that is from 1900 or 1901 to to 1910. You see this 1901 to 1900. That is when Queen Victoria died in 1901 and 1910 post Impressionist 1910 George V became the ruler. So when George V became the ruler, from that period onwards, George V, right? George V became the ruler, and George V became the ruler, and then we have 1910. This is very important. 1910 to 36. This is called George. So George V became the ruler, and then we call this Georgian period. And this is very important poem. Georgian period. This is called 1910 to 36, and that is called Georgian period. So George V, when he became the king, George पंचम, ऐसा कहा जाता है जॉर्ज पंचम के याद में गुरुदेव रविन्द्रनाथ टैगोर ने जनगण मन अधिनायक को गाया था. So that is called Georgian poetry. This is very interesting point called Georgian poetry. Georgian poetry was a group of poets, writers in the later era who loomed large in 4 anthologies titled Georgian poetry. ये जो किताब थी एडवर्ड मार्स द्वारा, this is called Edward Mars. See, he has published, this is called Georgian poem within 10 years. This is called Georgian poetry. This is called Georgian poetry. कभी भी क्वेश्चन उठता है यूजीसी नेट में कि who has published Georgian poetry, just simply say that it was Edward Mars who has published Georgian poetry. So that is, so how many writers? So there are 5. This was published in several pages. So जो main writers है Georgian period के, that you must know that one is called Rupert Brooke. One is called Rupert Brooke. You see, Arden, W.H. Arden का भी समय हम संभवतः इसी समय का है. विल्फ्रेड ओवेन, नॉट विल्फ्रेड ओवेन, ये नहीं है. वाल्टर डीला मारे, right? Rupert Brooke, Walter de la Mare. Then you have Rolf Hedison. You have Rolf Jack name. It is called Rolf Hedson. Hedson, right? And then you have W.H. Davis, John Mansfield. So these were the major writers. W.H. Auden, not W.H. Auden. W.H. Auden I will take up separately, but Rupert Brooke, Walter de la Mare, Ralph Hedson, W.H. Davis, and John Mansfield. And who is the main writer who has written the book called Georgian Poetry? Edward Mars. Edward Mars is the compiler of Georgian poem. And this Georgian poetry, as I told you, the period of, so Edwardian period, as I told you, it was basically known for its novel. The Edwardian period is basically known for its novel. However, Georgian period, you find most of some of the best poem. So Georgian poetry, Edward Mars, right? Edward Mars. And then you have, that is called 1910. So 1986, and then you have 5 anthology. So this was published in 5 anthology. He had published 5 anthology. One is called 1913, so 1915, and then you have 1960 to 70, 6 to 17, then you have 18 to 19 and 20 21, 18 to 19 and 20 to 21. So these were basic volumes that is called Georgian poetry. So you have, and some other writers are also, you can say. So they favored, तो क्या हुआ, ये जो writers थे जॉर्जियन पोएट्री में, they had some romantic tendency. इन्होंने कुछ रोमांटिक टेंडेंसी की भी बात किया. नंबर 1, रोमांटिक ट्रेडिशन, lyrical attitude, then you have certain features like you have pastoral setting, romanticism, lyrical tone, pastoral setting, and this was to some extent a blend. They are like a bridge between aesthetic and you have, one is called aesthetic, and then you have bridge means after modernism, aesthetic and highest modernist. आप ध्यान दीजिएगा. To some extent also D.H. Lawrence. So that is how. तो कुछ और राइटर का नाम जैसे सिगफ्रिड ससून, who is also very important poem. Siegfried Sassoon, right? Siegfried Sassoon, Walter de la Mare, Rupert Brooke, John Drinkwater. One is called John Drinkwater. तो इन सारे राइटर को आप पढ़ लीजिएगा इन फ्रॉम योर यूजीसी नेट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. सिगफ्रिड ससून, जॉन ड्रिंकवाटर, रूपर्ट ब्रूक, वाल्टर डी ला मारे, and D.H. Lawrence. You see, D.H. Lawrence has written some of the poems, very interesting poems like Piano, like Snake, and even D.H. Lawrence's novel is also what we call this poetic novel. Most of his novel, they are poetic novel. As he said that novel is the bride book of life. Read D.H. Lawrence. Very interesting writer. D.H. Lawrence, David Herbert Lawrence. His major fiction is called Rainbow. Women in Love. Sons and Lovers. Lady Chatterley Lovers. The White Peacock. Trespassers, Kangaroo. Extensively, he has written extensive writing. So these are writers. So this is called Georgian period. And that's how, as I told you, that Edwardian period, then Georgian period. So just I wanted to tell you some historical figures, and these are the writers. अब देखिए, when you understand the characteristics of these writers, इन्होंने क्या क्या characteristics किया. So remember, they favored traditionalism, they favored simple language, they favored conservative reaction against European modernism, they had sentimentality and emotion, they emphasized intimate theme like love and morality, they had what we call interwar tradition, nostalgia. To some extent, World War was also occurring at that time. There was Boer War, so they have world wars like Siegfried Sassoon or Rupert Brooke or these writers. So that is how. And after that, you find Wilfred Owen, and later you have W.H. Auden, right? So these poets, they wrote at the same time. तो इनको आप जरूर पढ़िएगा. They were transitional poet. Transitional in the sense that there is sentimentality. So in transition जब बात आती है तो sentimentality, anti-sentimentality. तो इसी तरह से आपके होते हैं these are the writers. Sentimentality, emotion, interwar transition, creating a nostalgia, contrast to the brutality of the era. And then you have the ब्रूटालिटी ऑफ द एरा, उस समय जो उस एरा में जो ब्रूटल थीम आया, ब्रूटालिटी ऑफ द एरा. So that is the basic theme of the writers that they explore, like they have interwar sentimentality, tradition, emotion, and therefore this is very important. So traditionalism, lyrical aspect, pastoralism, interwar tradition. So what is the basic significance of these writers? इन writers का overall significance देखा जाए तो हम क्या पाते हैं? You see, this Georgian period, or Edward Marsh has written a book. This is called the Georgian school was vital in transitioning from the Victorian era, then middle ground before high modernism. इसको ध्यान रखिएगा. Victorian and high modernism. जो हाई मॉडर्निज्म जब हम पढ़ते हैं तो हाई मॉडर्निज्म बेसिकली खास तौर से हम जब आते हैं हाई मॉडर्निज्म में, जब टी.एस. एलियट का जो वेस्ट लैंड जो मैं पढ़ा रहा हूं, द वेस्ट लैंड, इट इज वन ऑफ द मॉडर्निस्ट पोएम. द वेस्ट लैंड 1920. जब हाई मॉडर्निज्म आता है, आर यूलिसिस ऑफ जेम्स जॉयस का जब लिखा जाता है, दे वर द सेम बुक. और जैकॉब्स रूम. Interesting, these three books was written at the same time. Jacob's Room in 1922. जब हम इन सब चीजों को पढ़ते हैं तो ये जो जॉर्जियन स्कूल था, एक विक्टोरियन एंड हाई मॉडर्निज्म के बीच में एक ब्रिज का काम करता है. इट वर्क्स एज अ ब्रिज बिटवीन these two period before the middle ground, and this creates a middle ground. This creates a middle ground. So this is basically that I told you that this is basically the main function of Georgian poet. I will take up separately all these poets. So today I stop here. In my next period, I will be continuing this period further. Thank you.